Hi everyone and welcome along. Now so many people ask me how to get out of their own way when they're watercolour painting, how to loosen up, they get really het up on the details. So today I'm going to show you a watercolour painting technique that is going to turn your world upside down. Grab your paints and let's get started. Okay, now I'm left-handed, a left-handed painter, and so often I have to think about when I'm teaching that I sort of naturally want to start over here, whereas right-handed people naturally sort of want to start over there. We're not all the same in terms of our left and right-handedness, but what I have found is my approach and how I view the world is often a little upside down and backwards, and Ant will vouch for that. There are an awful lot of quirks and idiosyncrasies with the order in which I like to do things. But one thing that has resulted in the left-handedness is a real happy fluidity and comfortableness in creating and drawing and painting. I've never had a problem seeing a photo of something and getting a pretty good likeness. Now, I'm no photorealistic drawer, but I am pretty good. And I realised I'm always asking you to paint and draw with me. But these things can be quite difficult, and I've always wanted to see how I can help you. And I think I have just come up with something. Well, I don't think I've come up with it. It's a theory that is quite an ancient old theory about the left and the right sides of the brain. A lot of people are very convinced that the right side of the brain corresponds to a left-handed approach, and the left-hand side of the brain to a right-handed approach. Now, the left-hand side of the brain is more methodical, mathematical, logical. The right-hand side of the brain is just a little bit more fluid, and I will say creative. For I'm really going in like pop psychology layman's terms here, but we're getting to the point where how can we draw better? Well, what if we started to think a little bit more like a left-hander using the right side of the brain? Now, here is a photo of a rose. A rose is one of the most challenging but most asked for items that people want to paint. I get asked all the time about painting a rose, and I do tons and tons of tutorials on them, and yet it still seems to be something that's very challenging to people. So I've put my credibility on the line here by giving you this as an example. Now, if I asked you to draw this rose, I think a lot of people have this in their mind's eye, and let's face it, have you ever, and I think we all have, had that frustration where you can go, well, I can see it in my brain, but how do I get it down onto paper just like that? Well, it's because we're getting in our own way. We are seeing this shape and going, well, it's a rose, so I should be drawing a stem and leaves, but why is it not turning out how I want it to look? Well, it's because we are being too logical. What you actually need to think about when you are recreating something in an artistic form is how you're representing this shape through line, shape, form, value in terms of light and dark, colour and texture. We're painting something full of all those elements rather than we're painting a rose. So what we are going to do today is we are going to paint this rose upside down. And I am told that in doing this, it removes that logical side of the brain where you're going, I am painting a rose. Instead, we see this slightly strange shape and we are just going to paint what we see. And like I say, slightly putting my credibility on the line here, but I am going to have a go. And I want you to have a go at home. Of course, the thing is, for me, I enjoy painting, and so it's not necessarily an ultimate frustration for me, but I'm fascinated by this process. I want to see how it feels to be painting an upside down shape. So I'm looking at the top here and I'm just going to follow it. And what this means is I am really, really closely looking at what I've got here. I'm probably using a too large brush, but it's kind of what I want to use. So So I will talk you through sort of the colours I'm using. So I've got sap green just to darken down this shape here, and I've got sap green green gold mix in here, and just I see that light a bit, so I'm going to just not paint that in, and it's starting to get maybe a little bit darker, so we'll get a bit of burnt sienna Moonglow in there. But what it means in doing this, you're studying it in a different way. So I am so excited to see if any of you actually do have a go and try this, because I think if you are the kind of person who looked at a rose and goes, I just don't know how, I don't know how to paint a rose. Well, what if you're just painting something with light and shade, form and colour? So I'm just looking at the shape here and getting maybe a little serrated edge along the end. And we're just going to paint and draw in real time. It's funny because I don't do a huge amount of like studying from, well, I don't know, I do a bit of studying from photos and sight and things, but usually I've got like a rough reference and I'm doing my own thing. But I know that lots of us like to feel like we need to paint from sight and study, and you know, if to all events and purposes you're sort of doing a copy to study, and that's absolutely fine when you are practicing. So my head is going back and forth, back and forth. I am looking at this photo reference like consistently and constantly. I'd be really interested to know, any of you who are left-handed, whether you relate to what I was saying about just seeing the world a little differently. I think it's in terms of walking into a room and maybe wanting to sort of go anti-clockwise around it as opposed to clockwise. Obviously reading books and things, I mean, we have a dominant hand, and it's, for me, it's easier to, it like a, not obviously a novel, obviously we need to read that through the right way, but if I'm looking through a photo picture book, I will always open it from the back and flick through to the front, and that is just how I like to do it. But then there may be some right-handers amongst you who also do that, so I don't think it's a one-size-fits-all theory at all, but painting and drawing from the right side of your brain. There's a really fantastic book with that exact title, actually, that if you're interested in this theory, that is the origin of the whole theory. And for drawing's sakes, I think it's a really brilliant source of knowledge as well. I'll link to that in the episode notes. Okay, so down we come, and the colour is still just that bit darker, isn't it? Okay. I mean, the real test is the rose, isn't it? And of course you could draw the rose if you wanted, but what I'm quite interested in from a watercolourist point of view actually is, does doing this little exercise actually mean that we're going to paint more freely and more fluidly? And because a lot of people, that's the ultimate goal, isn't it? To loosen up and learn to paint in a more sort of loose watercolour style. Now, of course, this is not truly loose watercolour because we are still sort of going slowly and going step by step with it and sort of copying closely. But I think this is the first step on the road to painting more loose watercolour, is trying to see your subject matter as a series of lines, shapes, forms, values, colours and textures, rather than, oh my goodness, I've got to paint a rose. I don't know how to paint a rose. Ant was telling me when he was at school in sort of cadets, which is like a sort of kind of like a training, like sort of not like official military training, but they do this kind of army cadets thing for kids at school just to sort of get a taste of it. And he was asked to take down a quick sketch of a sort of a cannon like launcher thing, and he said it just floored him because he could see it. He was doing art GCSE. He was just absolutely stuck still because he couldn't work out how to get the picture in front of him out of his mind and onto the page. And I was like, well, if only you'd been standing on your head, darling, then you might have done it. Right. So I'm just looking step by step. Let's see how we go. So normally in a video I would totally stop recording and just sort of get on with it on my own, but I think for the sake of solidarity, and I hope Ant doesn't mind from an editing point of view, but I think it's quite important that I keep going. Now obviously with these layers of watercolour petals, I'm going to add in these tiny little gaps of unpainted space so that I can just keep painting. I'm quite excited though. I'm excited to turn this back up the other way round. We've just passed Valentine's Day, haven't we? So maybe we should have all learnt how to do this yesterday. I'd love to see if any of you did paint Valentine's cards from our range of card tutorials. Do let me know. Like, I'd love to see any of those you've got on Instagram. So I could see some slightly darker tones. You know what, maybe, we've never done this before, but maybe Ant might speed up the video. That might be interesting. And there we go. Well, that is a really interesting exercise. I actually really enjoyed painting a rose in that way, even though like I did come a cropper a little bit when I was doing the dark bits and I was like, oh, I need to let it dry for blends and everything. But I really enjoyed painting in the leaves and the stems in that way. It just made me see new elements and colours that I hadn't really noticed before. So if you are feeling like you just need to loosen up and you are struggling to get the image from your mind down onto the page, then have a go at this, and I promise you it will surprise you. Even if you feel like you come up with a disaster at the end, I promise you it will be the first step in retraining your brain to just loosen up a little. Okay, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you again next time. Bye!